You get this message now. It says recording in progress. Right. Okay. So welcome everyone to our branch meeting. Last night, our Vice President, Research Champion, Dr. Lucy Annett. And so without further ado, thank you, Lucy, and I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thank you, Simon. So I'm just sort of sharing my slides here. So
yep, they're coming through.
they're coming through. Okay, hope you can see the full screen there. Great.
If I could just say one thing, so before we start, if everyone can go on mute, that'd be great. I can actually mute people from here, so I'll just do that. And then, yeah, it's all yours, Lucy.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you for inviting me. It was actually Ruth who suggested I do this talk as research champion. So I first became research champion for this group about 2 years ago. And I gave a talk then about what we might do as research champion. And after that, I dropped into a couple of branch meetings and distributed leaflets like research champions are supposed to do. And then, of course, we've had COVID. And for all that time, I don't think I've had much contact so much with people, apart from attending these branch meetings, which is great to keep in touch. So I think it's a great idea to try and do this online as research champion. And let's see how that goes. Okay, so what am I going to talk about? So first of all, I have to say a little bit about me, I suppose. But then it's about what is a research champion role, and to sort of show what I'm trying to do here, which is to sort of alert you to tell you about bits of interesting research. We can't possibly cover everything, but what I've done is dipped into some of the research news in the Parkinson's UK pages, so we can look at those and see what's interesting. But also research volunteer opportunities, because that's also important in my role as research champion, encouraging people to take part in research. So I've just picked out a few here just to show sort of the range of opportunities, and I hope encourage people to take part. Although I know I'm talking to the converted here, many of you already do this. You're such a strong group research wise, but yes, anyway, it's interesting to look at what's out there. I think the really important message I want to talk about towards the end of the talk, though, is how important your input is to shape the future of Parkinson's research. So research goes on out there and the experts are doing the research, but what is done, and it's important it stays focused on what you think is important. You being the experts, the people with Parkinson's, you are the experts. So the researchers need to know. So that's sort of my argument towards the end. And again, I know any of you are doing this already, future shaping research, Parkinson's research, but it's just so important, I think. So I'll be talking about that. Okay, so let's just start with a little bit about me. So my day job is I'm principal lecturer in biological psychology at the University of Hertfordshire. So this is where I'm teaching psychology students about the brain. And this has always been my interest, that relationship between brain and behaviour. Yes, my first degree was actually psychology and physiology at University of Oxford. So very much that interface of brain and behaviour that interests me. And very early on, I got interested in the role of dopamine in thinking and movement, which of course is very relevant to Parkinson's. So a lot of my research has been involved with Parkinson's over many years. And if we go way back, when I was a researcher at the University of Cambridge, I was involved in very much brain research, working with models of Parkinson's. So this is in animals, using neurotoxins to destroy dopamine neurons. So those little brown taboo-y things we're looking at in the slide on the right, those are dopamine neurons looking down a microscope. So of course, animals don't get Parkinson's naturally. So this is a model that is used quite commonly to search for treatments, to test treatments. And that was my role. I was particularly involved in the early days of the research using grafts of dopamine neurons into the brain to replace lost neurons. So that is taking new embryonic growing dopamine neurons from other sources, from aborted fetuses, and transplanting them into the brain of people with Parkinson's. And that, of course, is still ongoing. It does take many, many years here. But Roger Barker in Cambridge particularly is in the UK, is this sort of research is still going on, leading towards treatments. So the other type of research I was involved in was using viral vectors to create a model of Parkinson's and also to deliver Gdnf. So a viral vector is where the virologists, the clever researchers there, I don't do this part, they manipulate a virus to take out all the dangerous parts and just leave the bit of the virus that enables it to inject genetic material, to insert genetic material into other cells. And we can use this to put in genes, genetic material into other cells in the brain so that those cells are tricked into making what we want them to produce, like, say, dopamine, or in this case, the neurotrophic factor Gdnf. And I mention this particularly because, of course, Gdnf has been in the news a lot in research trials. And I was involved in some of the very early research with that, looking at how this growth factor in the brain can actually help boost dopamine. So that's sort of my background on the brain research side of things. But since then, since I've been at the University of Hertfordshire, I've sort of changed rather to be more sort of working with people with Parkinson's more directly, perhaps more on the psychology side, still interested in the brain, but not actually measuring it directly, more interested in the idea that exercise is good for people with Parkinson's, the use it or lose it idea. This is behavior, psychology feeding back on the brain, which I think is really interesting. And this involved working with a dance for Parkinson's. And of course, we can see at the bottom right there, a picture of Meryl, the dance teacher at the University of Hertfordshire dance classes. And these are very important for our research. We're doing research. Many of you contributed, took part in these research studies. And these were looking at things like improving mood and well-being with dance for Parkinson's. More recently, I've also been involved with Liz Opperdyke doing research with accessible chair yoga, mainly for people living in care homes, actually, people with dementia, although there's also works with people with Parkinson's. We'll be doing some research on that. And also with Liz Mindful, this is a current study, actually. I don't know if any of you are in this, but we're doing this at the moment. And with Becky Hadley, did a similar study last year with some students, mindfulness for people with Parkinson's. So this, I think, is very interesting. This is very much the psychology acting back on the symptoms. What we're interested in here is can people with Parkinson's use mindfulness to help deal with their symptoms? So that's sort of ongoing research at the moment. And you see the people I've worked with here. I think many of these people have actually spoken to this branch at one time or another. I'm sure you know. I know Dawn did last year about her music and movement. Of course, that picture on the bottom left is Dawn with Ruth. Ruth isn't here, but anyway, her picture's here, taking part in a research study. But I think Peter Lovett, Amelia and Becky Hadley have all spoken. I'm also involved with the research with Mahmoud Iravani. I think I've spoken with you, and this is back more with the brain studies. Mahmoud is a pharmacologist working on drugs to treat Parkinson's, and I know some of you have been at lectures by him and his students on this work. Looking at drugs to treat dyskinesias in Parkinson's mainly. So that's sort of me, but that's as much as I'm going to say about my research, because this talk today is not about my research, it's about what research is out there, about volunteer opportunities and shaping research. So let's leave all that. It's just sort of to give you an idea of where I'm coming from on this. And why I enjoy being research champion, actually, I think that because I've been interested in brain research for Parkinson's and psychology, it's quite broad. So I was really delighted when it was suggested and your branch sort of agreed that I could be your research champion, because that's what I love doing, reading about research, finding out about research. It's exciting. So it's how to get this across to everybody. So we're trying this today to see if this is the best way. But at the end, please do say what you'd like me to do as a research champion. Is this the best way of doing this, or what would you like to focus on? So that's certainly for the end. Okay, so research champions are set up by Parkinson's UK, and here we're looking at Parkinson's UK webpage about research champions. And the role of the research champions to connect your local community to research. So in my local community here, the West-Herts branch, sharing news about events and opportunities to shape, steer, and take part in research. And that word shape is there, and steer, I think that's so important. Taking part in research, yes, that's really important, but even more than that, actually inputting to the directions that research is going to go. Okay, so I'm Hope as research champion. That's what I can add to this group, what I can help assist with if possible. So that's what a research champion does, what I'm trying to do here. Okay. Right, so I say because of COVID, we haven't really spoke much as research champion in the past year. One thing I did do before COVID, though, we had a couple of meetings at the University of Hertfordshire where we took a particular research study and really focused on that. And we actually chose the Gdnf trial. And we took the actual publication, the actual scientific publication, and read that as a group and tried to dissect it, to understand it. I enjoyed doing that. I hope those of you who were there enjoyed doing that. I'd like to think that we can make these sort of actual articles accessible. They can be very hard to understand. I don't always understand every word. The point is, as a group, we can try and work it out, and we can discuss the important points that come out of that. Often we learn about research from the media, from Parkinson'S UK, and they do excellent summaries. But I think it's important to actually delve down to the details of what was done in the research so we can understand exactly what the research showed, and importantly, what it didn't show, because usually there are limitations. And certainly with the Gdnf trial, we discussed, there was lots of interesting things to discuss, like what was that the right measure they were using? I know some of you had opinions on that. And the outcome, which was counted as negative, and yet had positives in it. So it was interesting discussions about that. So I did do one session online last year during COVID, but I haven't attempted more than that, mainly because it's been so busy in universities over the past year. It's been quite a year with all this chopping and changing. There's not been much time to do a great deal else, but I would like to get back to this if you think this is a good idea, and I'm open to suggestions as to what topics we could look at, to look at those original research articles. So please feel free to suggest on that. And any other ideas about what we'd like to do on the research side as research champion. Yeah, I could pause and say, are there any thoughts or comments so far? Okay. Okay, so I'll move on to the... Hello.
Sorry, it's Simon speaking, Lucy. If anyone does have comments, everyone is on mute at the moment, so they'll need to unmute themselves. But I guess that's, no, I think we're okay to carry on.
I'll keep going. Okay, right. So the next part is I'd like to talk about research opportunities and where you find these. No, not opportunities. I'm going to start with research news. That's right. So start with research news. And here I've gone to the Parkinson'S UK website, as I do think they do an excellent job summarising research and finding the interesting things that are going on. Obviously, they're funding a lot of it as well, so that helps. I had thought I might go to the Parkinson'S website live and do this live. Then I decided not, because sometimes when you're following this on Zoom, it doesn't always follow. It doesn't always work. And also because when I'm clicking through, sometimes I know when I'm listening to somebody else doing that, thinking, what did they click? Where did they go? How do you find that? So instead, I've taken screenshots from the web pages and put little arrows to show where you find things. I'm sure many of you have looked around this, but there's so much on this website. I haven't explored it all, and perhaps not everybody's looked at everything. So, okay, for the latest research, this is the Parkinson'S UK homepage. And I've just put the arrow there to show where to click, sort of on research there. And then this opens up with this various columns here. We're going to look at the get involved in research part later on. But for now, we're going to look at research news. So I clicked on research news there. There's also our research magazine, the Progress magazine, that we're going to look at in a moment as well. But starting with research news, and you get a page a bit like this. I've just edited it a little bit to get more on the page. But it comes up with interesting news stories about research. So I thought I'd start with here and just look into briefly what these are, what's going on. So these are published by date. I think it sort of illustrates sort of the range of research and issues going on. So just starting with this one, controlling protein production in brain cells could help treat Parkinson's. So what I did is I clicked into this and had a little bit read more about that and into the further details. So this is a study going on at University College London by Professor Rohan de Silva and Dr. Roberto Simone. And it's all about the protein tau protein, which actually is more typically thought to be important in Alzheimer's, but is also important in Parkinson's because, of course, there's some crossovers here. Some similarities in the mechanisms, which means things that are of interest in controlling tau probably also of interest in controlling the proteins involved in Parkinson's. Now, this study is really down to the level of genes and using genetic signals to manipulate the proteins that build up and go wrong in Parkinson's. It's actually using something that I hadn't heard of before, but using genetic material known as antisense non-coding RNA. So don't ask me the details of exactly what that is, but the RNA is involved in those stages of translating the genetic code, the blueprint, into producing the protein. So somehow the researchers here have worked out a way of controlling that. So this research story is about the potential, I think, of controlling the proteins that might be going awry in Parkinson's. So it's a sort of research study which is sort of early days towards a treatment. It's sort of hopeful. It sounds quite exciting, but it's a bit of a long way from a treatment. So it's one of those very what's the word, or genetic, biological, perhaps early days towards a treatment sort of research studies, but nevertheless quite important there. Okay, so the next one along, I think, is really interesting, actually, isn't it? Scientists move closer to developing game-changing tests to diagnose Parkinson's. And yes, the lady there is actually smelling her handkerchief. So this is the story that actually hit the news a little while ago about this lady, Joy Milne, who discovered that she could smell a difference in her husband who had Parkinson's. Her husband smelt different. And she could actually smell whether somebody had Parkinson's. I don't know if you can remember that. It sort of hit the news, and it's one of those where you go, oh, wow, what's going on there? And then it takes a few years for the scientists to do the research and work out what's going on. So this news item here was about the publication of a research group actually working out what's going on. And this one, I thought it was so interesting. I did actually dip into this and go to the actual research publication to see what I could make of it. And it is quite a technical one. This is the actual scientific publication. And of course, scientists put so much weight on these publications in these journals because these are the detailed, careful, scrutinized report of exactly what was done in the study that other scientists can then scrutinize, and people like you and I can also read. Interestingly, it's open access. More and more of these articles are being published so that everybody can read them with open access. They used to be only in printed journals in libraries and universities that most of us perhaps couldn't access, but now we can all have a go looking at them. Anyway, the story behind this is this group at University of Manchester, Perdita Barron and Eleanor Sinclair, gathered sebum, so it's sort of the oily stuff in your skin, from the backs of people with Parkinson's. So they sort of took this oily sort of sebum samples from 80 people with Parkinson's who didn't have any drug treatment, another 138 who did have drug treatment, and 56 people who didn't have Parkinson's. Now, it's important, of course, to take it do these samples from people who are not being treated with drugs, because it might be the drugs themselves that are causing this difference in the smell. So that's why they did that. So they had all these samples, and essentially they put them through a process to identify what molecules were in there. So they use this mass spectroscopy. I'm saying that, and I think people in the audience, I think Janet is biology, probably know more about it than I do than this, but essentially it is they were able to identify the chemicals, molecules in these samples. And they identified 10 chemicals which tended to be different in the people with Parkinson's compared to the people who didn't, such that they were able to identify with 85% accuracy whether somebody had Parkinson's or not, just from the combinations, the amounts of these particular chemicals. So really quite interesting that perhaps it's useful as a biomarker for Parkinson's, because it is quite hard to actually have simple diagnostic tests like that. I'm not sure if 85% is accurate enough, but it's probably in the realms of other ways of identifying Parkinson's, the amount. How it works, we don't know. So this is the limitation. This is as far as it's got. It's maybe a way of identifying people with Parkinson's. We don't know quite why it's those chemicals. I thought it was very interesting in the discussion. Some of these chemicals, they're lipids, they're very fatty acids, and other researchers found that these substances may actually be disrupted, their metabolism, by mitochondrial dysfunction, which we know is important in Parkinson's. So we don't know the full reason why yet, and I think this is why these sort of studies they lead to like detective stories. They lead on to the next thing, and they might lead to further advances in the future. So this is where this research has got to so far anyway. So I think that was sort of really interesting. It's one of those research areas that's come out of nowhere at one point, just because of this lady making this observation. So it's really important here for people with Parkinson's and partners to feed into research ideas. So, okay, I found that one interesting. What else have we got? The next one along, we're investing 1.2 million into a drug that could slow Parkinson's. Now, this is research by Dr. Heather Mortboys at University of Sheffield. And I know Heather's given quite a few talks. You may have heard her at conferences online and so on. And the group in Sheffield are very interested, did a lot of research on the mitochondria. So these are the tiny little organelles inside the cells which produce the energy. And they're really important, particularly in brain cells and in dopamine cells. And we know in Parkinson's that there can be mitochondria that have gone wrong, and perhaps they're not getting rid of as they should have done. So when mitochondria not working well, that's an important mechanism underlying Parkinson's. So this particular study, what's been invested in is this group have been identifying molecules that can restore mitochondrial in DNA neurons. So that's very exciting. I think they're also looking at getting rid of the dysfunctioning ones. So this is about leading to drug discovery. This is about potential ways of having drugs to treat Parkinson's. I think this is really important, really key, actually. That the mitochondria seem to be the problem. People with Parkinson's get fatigue. It's not surprising they don't have energy if the mitochondria are not working as well. So a drug that could help with that, could help restore mitochondria, could be really important. So I can see why, my opinion, Parkinson's UK investing a lot of money into developing drugs that could do that. Okay, and the last one I've just chosen here, again, these are just the 4 most recent news items. Parkinson's UK investing in a new Gdnf trial. And of course, this is interesting. Well, not actually in the trial itself. This is in preparations for the trial. This is just 2 years worth of work of planning a trial, and it costs £800,000 because these trials take many years, as we know, and a lot of money. So, of course, the story behind this, as we discussed at the research reading groups we had, was that 2 years ago, the outcome of the Gdnf trial was reported. This is the trial where people with Parkinson's actually had this growth factor infused into their brains. Remember, famously, Tom Isaacs and other people we know, actually, who are involved in this trial. And the growth factor, they had these infusions. And of course, it's a trial that took many years, and eventually it was published. And unfortunately, the headline news was it hasn't worked because the required endpoint hadn't been reached, which was very disappointing. But a lot of discussion about this because the endpoint was to do with motor symptoms, I think using the Parkinson's disease rating scale. And the reason researchers choose a single endpoint is because if you had lots and lots, you could pick and choose as to which you say, oh, it's worked because of that. That would be sort of milking the data if you had too many different ways you could say it's worked, because some might have occurred by chance. That's why research trials have a single, this is the key thing we're looking for. And unfortunately, that wasn't met. Interestingly, though, there were other signs that the Gdnf had worked, that particularly in brain scans, that dopamine levels had been increased. So there were certainly signs it was working. And many of the people who had had the Gdnf really thought it was helping them. So this is a really interesting story. This is the power of people with Parkinson's shaping research, in that the pressure from this, and there is a Gdnf participant group who are campaigning and advocating for this work to continue, and have been successful here, that Parkinson's UK are planning a new trial. So it's not all been abandoned, and they're going to look at this again. So that is the story behind that. I think that's interesting how this evolves. And good news that it's not all just being abandoned. Drug companies, of course, be a bit reluctant to keep going with that if the outcome of the trial was negative. But yeah, so Parkinson's UK are investing in that. Okay, so that's the news headlines there, but there's so much more on the Parkinson's UK website, and I'm not going to go into details on these. We just looked at that, but the other place to look for research is in the Progress, our research magazine. This was also in that research news section. A lot of detail in there. You can read about articles, read about research studies. I find them very good summaries. If you find them a bit hard going, and if you're interested in them, it's the sort of thing we could discuss at these meetings. We could look at them in more detail. I'd be happy to sort of do research. I don't know about all of them away. I have to go away and read the research and find out what they are. But anyway, the examples here you see from the last 3 Progress research magazines: clinical trial of CBD, that's sort of cannabis for Parkinson's, about the gut, middle one, gut bacteria. I'll say a bit more on that in a moment. Recipe for a cure. So there's a lot in these magazines to look for research. I say if you're interested in any, we could talk about those at future meetings. I did want to mention the research interest group, the East of England Research Interest Group. And I know that Ruth has been heavily involved in this. I think she invited me to some. I think some of you maybe as well. Now, this is through Parkinson's UK, but it's sort of a separate independent group that's particularly interested in research. And what the East of England group do is invite speakers. And it's great that these are recorded and they're available for everybody to see. So I've put all of these slides, the web address there. So I do recommend these. Actually, I think it's an advantage that they're recorded and not live, because actually I missed the last one. I was away and I was able to listen to it later. And of course, if you miss a bit, you can replay it. If it's online, you can go over it again. If you're not sure, you could speed through it. Anyway, this was a really interesting topic, gut health in Parkinson's, because a lot of interest in the gut from the theory, from Barak's theory that evidence that the damage in Parkinson's might start in the gut and actually travel up through the nerves, through the vagus nerve up to the brain. Some research for that. And then, of course, remember that the gut, that constipation is a feature of Parkinson's. Even James Parkinson back in 1817 recognized that. So here, this was a very interesting talk. I listened to it sort of online later by Marta Kamchacho, who's working at the University of Cambridge, working with Roger Barker and Carolyn Williams-Gray. She's essentially analysing poo samples, as she explained sort of a bit graphically in the talk, and asking people about when they go to the toilet and recording their stools. And it sounded quite fun, quite interesting, actually, very interesting. But her publication so far, please do listen to the talk, as my brief summary here. One finding was that constipation is closely related with Parkinson's actually predicts the progression of the disease, which is very interesting. So I think makes it not just a loose association, it really suggests this very important. And also she's found that cognition impairments in Parkinson's are also associated with constipation. So I think all of this is strengthening this interest we have in the gut in Parkinson's and how that's related to brain things. I thought her talk was very interesting for saying the research she's done, but also what we don't know yet. We don't know quite why. And the talks are also interesting from the questions from the audience asking about specific nutrients, chemicals, things in the gut. And she was quite clear there isn't a, we don't know the answer to all of these yet as to chemically sort of what's going on. There's a hypothesis that we think that inflammation in the gut may be the trigger, that if you're constipated and there's some local inflammation, that may trigger inflammation up in the brain, may reach the brain. So a very interesting talk, I thought, on the topic of gut in Parkinson's, and also quite how far the research has gone. It's sort of early days, but I think very important, but we don't have all the answers yet. Okay, so that's just one talk, but there's other talks there. Previous talks are all on the website. Mina Wrighton, using genetics to understand and find treatments for Parkinson's. And then before that, Alistair Noyce, who's a neurologist, is in London, about the causes and determinants of Parkinson's. And before that, Catherine Dean on anxiety therapies. I know Catherine's also talked to this group, but it's nice to have those recordings. If you don't want to be reading as much, just listening to somebody talking, I think is really good. Okay, so that's all Parkinson's UK. Just to mention other sources, of course, Cure Parkinson's, used to be Cure Parkinson's Trust. Their website is also, has research news, of course. Cure Parkinson's is very much focused on the cures and research. And if you're looking for that on the website, go to latest news. I particularly like on here the webinars. Again, listening to talks. Well, these are more discussions than talks. So the webinars, and to get to those, you click on latest research and then webinars. And from that, then you get to those recordings of webinars. So you can go to them live. You can register and go to them live and give questions at the time. But they're also recorded to listen to afterwards. And the next one coming up is in August, I think, Genetic Markers and the Progression of Parkinson's. And they're led by Professor Patrick Brundin, who for many years, I know was at the University of Lund when I was involved in the graft work. It was also important in that. But he's now at the university in Michigan, working with an organization there. And he's really expert, and he's really good at leading these people discussions. So typically he's getting the top researchers in. That's why I think they're very good, taking very important topics, getting key researchers in and discussing them. So topics they've talked about is exercise for Parkinson's, inflammation in Parkinson's, young onset Parkinson's, prodromal Parkinson's, coronavirus and Parkinson's. So all these sort of topics, sort of about one a month, all recorded so you can go after them, look at them later. Now, okay, those are just my recommendations. I said we could get swamped looking at anything. I'd be interested to hear from you, the audience, if there are other good research sites that you look at that you find interesting. This is sort of for sharing. So please either say now or we can say at the end.
There's the Michael J. Fox one, Lucy. It's the Michael.
Oh, of course, Michael J. Fox. Yes, yes. There's going to be a huge amount. I didn't even go to that. I thought there's so much there. Of course, that's one of the biggest organisations involved in that. I suppose I was sort of focusing on the UK side here, but you're absolutely right. Of course, yes, there'll be a lot of them. Of course, these organisations cooperate a lot, and Michael J. Fox funds research in the UK as well. But certainly, yeah. Okay, so I'd like to move on and now talk about research volunteering. Because of course, research can only happen if there are volunteers to take part. It can't happen unless people with Parkinson's are volunteering to take part. Okay, some things are done on cells in dishes and so on, but a lot of the research is people working directly with people with Parkinson's, and it really needs volunteers. It can't happen without. So again, Parkinson's UK is very keen to encourage people with Parkinson's to take part in research. And as research champion, I'm championing this and saying, please do. Again, I know many of you do, but here. And the way to find that, the opportunities on the Parkinson's UK site is, again, from research page, click on it's under the Get Involved in Research, and click on Take Part in Research. And if you do that, that takes you to this Take Part hub. Now, this has been organized by location. So you put in your address and it comes up with studies near you. Now, that was all well and good a year or two ago, but of course now it's less important where studies are based, because the vast majority can be done online or by phone or by post. And we've had to do that during COVID. So there's an awful lot where it doesn't matter where they're based. But anyway, you do need to put an address in. So I tried searching with Watford, the address. I also tried with my home address and the university address, and it does come up with slightly different things. So I would recommend trying different places to get slightly different, but many of the online ones all come up. So I've just picked out a few here that I think look sort of interesting to give a flavour of the sort of studies, to get across the point that the vast majority of studies, not only can they be done at home, they don't involve taking drugs or having brain scans or that sort of intervention. An awful lot of them are asking you for information, doing questionnaires and interviews and so on, which is somewhat easy to take part. So I did find one that involved taking a drug, if you're interested in that. This is particularly for depression. I had to search and put Luton in to find this. It's been done all over the country, but Luton is one of the centres. This is a trial, the ADEPT study, and it's looking at 2 different types of antidepressant drugs, comparing. So these are antidepressant drugs that are used generally to treat depression, have been used in Parkinson's. What's new here is, I think, is they're being compared, and one of them potentially might slow the progression of Parkinson's, may help movement symptoms as well. So that's sort of the new aspect of it. So in this trial, if you're interested in that, it's only for people who've got depressive symptoms, low mood, and are not already being treated for that. There's that looks quite sort of interesting, but it's a study where you'd have to agree, and you wouldn't know what drug you were getting. Of course, it's one of these trials where you agree to take part, but you don't know which one you're getting. It could be one of the drugs is a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, which is the most common type of antidepressant, and the other one is the nortriptyline, is affecting a different neurotransmitter, more noradrenaline. Or you might not get drug at all. But anyway, so it's specifically looking at these in people with Parkinson's. So that's the one drug trial I could find. There are not many drug trials at all. The other one here is a sort of biological one, but it can be done from home. I think this is interesting how researchers have adapted. Whereas normally you might have gone into a lab, now it can be done by post. So this is identifying genes in people with Parkinson's, and it involves doing a saliva sample by post. So, and it's sent off to the researchers. Written down who these are. I'm pretty sure it's Anthony Shapiro. I'll bring that down. But essentially, they're trying to find people with 2 particular genetic variations that increase the risk of Parkinson's. One is GBA, glucocerebrosidase, a gene that's also involved in Gaucher's disease, which also increases the risk of Parkinson's. And the other one is the LRRK2, the LRRK2, which is also an increased risk of Parkinson's. But what they want is people with these genetic variations, so they can identify you, and then you might be invited to take part in future drug trials. Okay, so I picked this one out because it's sort of saliva by post, sort of biological. The other ones I've picked out are very much questionnaires, interviews, and they're all about asking for your opinion. So the research here is not about research to do with the brain or immediate treatments. It's more about therapies, and it's research testing therapies. So one of them is to do with speech and language therapy, the one at the top there. So obviously it's specific for people who've had those treatments, but research is needed to investigate how good treatments are, to develop treatments. So this is for people who've had those sort of treatments to give your opinion, really. Online questionnaires here, finding out, and that's going to shape future treatments. It's like improving the service. So that's also research that's important for Parkinson's. I was quite interested in the one in the bottom half of the slide here, online questionnaire to identify your self-care strategies, being done by a group at the University of Oulu. And I had to look up where that is. I didn't know. It's actually in Finland. It's a large university in Finland. But I think it's very interesting. It's asking people with Parkinson's, well, what do you do, your self-care strategies? Maybe there are things that I'm thinking here that you know, that your strategies that researchers don't, that might be useful to share, might be useful then to find out what they are. So I think what I'd say is sort of exploratory research here that might lead to future treatments, but it's asking you what works for you. So I think that's a great strategy. Just a couple more here. Oh, the one at the top is Dawn Rose, Music, Mood for Movement. So Dawn is now, of course, she's based in Switzerland, but she's doing research in collaboration with Ellen Polyakov and her group in Manchester, who were interested in movement for Parkinson's and imagining, sort of imagined here. So a study sounds interesting here, looking at the difference between hearing music and imagining music. Anyway, if you're interested in Dawn's study there, the deadline's actually passed, but if you're interested, it might be worth asking Dawn if it's still up on the website. Maybe they're still recruiting. And finally, the one below, the Predict PD, is a very large study. It's actually for people who don't have Parkinson's yet. So, and they're looking for up to 10,000 people here. The idea is to take people between the age of 60 and 80 who don't have Parkinson's, do these baseline assessments and follow them over many years to see who gets Parkinson's, and then to look back and see, well, what could we predicted that from? What measures? Now, I've actually signed up for this one. So I am in this study, and I had to do, it was all online, and had to do some online questions online, and even a motor task. I was actually pressing buttons on the keyboard quickly. So they've got a measure of my motor skill. That was interesting. So for those of you who don't have Parkinson's, this is one you can take part in that will be useful. And then, of course, those people who do eventually get Parkinson's, be focusing on those. I think I only have to do something like once a year, probably less. Yeah. Okay, so examples of research opportunities, but there's more out there. The Research Support Network, excuse me, also sends out messages about research opportunities. So this is if you signed up to the Research Support Network, which you can do through the Parkinson's UK site. And then you'll get emails about research. So I get some of these. So it's a sort of different way of getting research information. As a researcher, this is really useful for me, because if we're doing a study, we can ask Parkinson's UK to advertise it for us through this. I just picked out a couple here of interest. This one interested me because it's about exercise, physical activity, looking at the impact of the COVID pandemic on physical activity and mental health, which of course has been an issue for many people during the COVID pandemic. But this is looking at specifically people with Parkinson's on that. And it's one of these online questionnaires. So it's actually only going to take probably 15, 20 minutes to do, but really useful for the researchers there. These researchers are at the University of Southampton. That sort of research is important for then arguing for resources afterwards. So, you know, demonstrate what's the evidence as a problem before you can then put resources in. So there's even a link to the online questionnaire. So I'm sort of encouraging, this could be reasonably easy to do. And this one here, finally, I picked out because this involves interviews, which of course can be done on telephone or on Zoom. And again, it's one of these where it's asking you, people with Parkinson's, about your lifestyle and managing non-motor symptoms by a group of researchers at Oxford Brookes. I actually looked into this a little bit more to discover that these researchers are actually nutritionists. So they're interested in diet. I know many of you have questions or interested in diet, and they're actually researching this. Again, this is now, it's actually not a questionnaire. It's they will arrange a time to speak with you on Zoom or on the phone as an interview. So we call it qualitative research. Anyway, so I hope I've shown you here sort of a range of research studies, many of which are actually easy to do at home, and many of them are straightforward to do. What I did want to mention is because also of them have more detailed information. It's important to look at the information sheet that comes with all of them that gives a lot of detail. I'm particularly emphasizing this because part of that information is to reassure you that the study has been approved by an ethics committee. And if it's research done at a university, it'll be the university's ethics committee, or if it's done in the NHS, it'll be the NHS ethics. And that for you is this sort of a safety thing, and a sort of that it's bona fide research. And actually Parkinson's UK will only advertise if there's ethics approval. We have to send the ethics approval. But it tells you all about its benefits and research. So I thought the Oxford Brookes people had done a good job with their ethics, with their information here. Okay. Right, so I hope I've dipped into research opportunities here to encourage you. You can do that by clicking the button if you've got a spare half an hour, quite a few of these. So in the last part of the talk, just want to stress about this, the importance of not just taking part in research as a volunteer, but actually shaping research. I think this is really key. So this is in the patient public involvement agenda that Parkinson's UK are very keen to promote here, to encourage you to take part. Key thing here is, I think, is shaping research, setting priorities, underlined there. So you as the service user, it's important for you to say what you think is the important research should be done. What's important to you in Parkinson's? What needs solving? What, is it new treatments? What is it? Is it particular problems? Are there ideas you've got for you think should be researched that people are not doing? You can actually drive the research here and influence what research is done. So this is what we mean here by shaping research. So please, there's a little, I don't have time to play it now, but a little sort of video clip there about people talking about patient public involvement. So I'm just stressing, I just think this is so important here for you to shape research. So researchers are expert in their field, and they're expert in that, but maybe they don't know connections with other ideas. So you, with people with Parkinson's, come in with sort of a different direction, different thing, also ask the questions, what about this, what about that make the researchers think in a different way, and maybe think, oh, perhaps that will be interesting to research. So your suggestions are really important through these processes, through public patient involvement with Parkinson's UK, or simply attending a research talk and asking questions. I think that's so important. Parkinson's UK have got ways of becoming a volunteer shaping research. You could be reviewing grant applications. So this is influencing where Parkinson's UK spend their money on research. Become a patient public involvement volunteer. I think Janet's been involved in this quite a bit. Research champion, that's what I'm doing here. So, but I was stressing it, just talking with researchers and asking questions about what's important to you. I think that's key as well. Gives researchers ideas and makes them sort of think a bit beyond their particular research areas sometimes. So please do think about that, getting involved. Actually, I'm going to skip through that, but Becky pointed this out to me. There are groups, just very briefly, this is for dementia, coming together as the service users actually having control over research, planning research. And that for Parkinson's, I do want to mention this book. Oh, I've left it. I've got the book. I was going to show it. Anyway, I do have a copy. How many of you got this? So this came out last year, A Prescription for Action Ending Parkinson's, by a group of mainly American, but one of the authors, Ray Dorsey leading there, but Bastien Bloen in the Netherlands is involved here. I do recommend this book here, but it certainly fits with this agenda that I've been talking about shaping and driving research, that people with Parkinson's shouldn't sit back. They should really be here advocating for therapies, for research. They call it a pact, prevent, which is largely, they talk about some of the toxins, getting rid of chemicals and so on. Advocate is what I'm talking about here, is standing up for research. You know, there's not enough money being in Parkinson's research compared to some conditions doing that. Yeah, so definitely sort of recommend that book. I think it fits with what I'm saying. And I was interested to learn that there is actually a group that's come out of this called United to End Parkinson's, PD Avengers. And they've got a campaign there of donations, and it's all about raising the profile of Parkinson's and Parkinson's research, and American based mainly. I haven't joined this yet. I'm just wondering if anybody else has, whether anyone's heard of this. It might be interested. I might look into that a bit more. Okay, so yes, there we go. So what next then? So as your research champion, what can we be doing next? Talk about research. So Ruth and Simon and I were talking about having a research page on the West-Herts branch website, but I haven't had time to get together with Simon and actually do this, but I thought, well, we could ask you, would that be useful? It would be mainly links to other things, but it could be a bit more specific to us maybe. Shall I keep going with the research reading group? Hopefully we could meet in person sometime. More research reading groups, suggestions for that, for topics. Or shall I do another one of these in, I don't know, 6 months, a year's time, or at branch meetings? And would you like me to focus on fewer things in more depth, or just general what's come up? So this is sort of over to you to say, what should we do from here on research and how we do this in the branch? Okay, so thank you very much for listening to me there, and sort of over to you for questions and discussion.
Thank you, Lucy. Thanks very much. Really enjoyed that. Very, very interesting and very informative. And hopefully people will get involved and take part in the research and give feedback to Parkinson's UK. So yes, if you do want to ask questions, please come off mute and ask Lucy.
Hello, Lucy. Nice to see you again.
Janet.
Just a few points. Radio 4 this morning had a program on discussing the appendix and the appendix in Parkinson's.
Right.
And it was talking about, they were thinking there were two possible types of Parkinson's. One where it started in the gut and went to the brain, and one that started in the brain and went to the gut.
Oh, okay.
Which
I hadn't heard about the other way around, but
that's, you have to look it up on.
Okay, I'll look in, yeah.
Yeah, that. But I just thought that was interesting that we were, you know, up in the prime time radio.
Yes, yeah, it's always interesting when the things appear on the radio or TV, and then it's nice to be able to look at what's the research behind that. That's what my ambition is, a research champion, to say, okay, we'll delve into that. Just about the appendix, I think there's research, certainly research that shows that people who've had their vagus nerve cut because of gut problems have a lower risk of Parkinson's. I think that's also true of people who've had their appendix removed.
Yeah,
I think so, and that fits with the theory that if you can reduce inflammation in the gut, that might reduce the risk of Parkinson's. But I think Parkinson's is such a broad condition with many different causes, and not everybody's going to be. So I wouldn't be surprised if some people it starts in the gut and travels up the brain. Other people, it's the brain's the first problem, and it ends up damaging the gut. So wouldn't be surprised at that.
Yeah,
yeah.
I was interested to hear, Lucy, about the lady that could sniff Parkinson's, because I saw on this morning a few weeks ago about this dog that could actually sniff out Parkinson's and had been trained to do that.
Right, yes.
Obviously dogs have a very high sense of smell, and yeah, they can actually train dogs to smell out Parkinson's.
Quite remarkable, isn't it? I think they were training dogs to smell people with COVID as well.
That's
so
right.
It's interesting that all these conditions have slightly different metabolisms going on, which end up with slightly different chemicals being secreted from the skin, presumably, and dogs can be trained to do that, but even people can smell it sometimes.
Incredible, isn't it? Yeah.
But I think it leads to these interesting clues as to, you know, it's a bit of a detective story, isn't it? Interesting observation as to, well, why is it so? And it's sort of revealing which chemicals may be important, which ones are disturbed.
Yeah, indeed. Okay. Were there any more questions from Lucy, from anyone? Or any requests for Lucy to look into certain research topics?
Yes, so I mean, a way we could do for another time is you suggest a topic or one or two topics that I then have a few weeks to go away and research and come back to you with a bit more about that, because I don't know everything about everything at all. I do have to go and look things up. But we could do that if there are particular topics of interest.
And if people wanted to get in touch, they could either go to the website and email the website, so that would come through to me, and then I could forward the questions to Lucy. Or I think you said, Lucy, it would be okay if people were to email yourself as well. Would that be right?
Yes, that's fine to email me directly. Yeah.
Okay.
And we did talk about doing something on the website where I could put something a bit more about research reading groups and ask people to contact me if they're interested. I know several of you have come to them previously. Shall we continue with those? Should we try and do them online, or is it time to actually try and meet up somewhere?
I think it'd be best to do it online for the time being.
Online for the time being, yes.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, many thanks, Lucy. That was really interesting and really informative. Thank you for coming along tonight and talking about those topics. I was going to ask as well, do Parkinson'S UK also want non-Parkinson'S volunteers? But you answered that question already, so I see that.
Oh yes, well, if you look at the studies, it's worth having a look, because many studies do want controls, people who don't have Parkinson's, to compare with people who do. So quite often some of them are research specifically about the partners and people living with people with Parkinson's as well. So it's certainly worth looking into. Yeah,
lovely. Okay, well, go on, Joanna.
It'd be interesting to take the end of the main COVID outbreak, which I don't think we're quite there yet.
No, we're not. Yeah,
and look at how that has impacted on people with Parkinson's. So the decline or the improvement in their condition, and maybe take that as a starting point to look at speech therapy, exercise, and one or two other things, because I think a lot of people have been quite affected. The pandemic and becoming socially anxious. As well. So
of course, that research is ongoing, isn't it? As we saw, one of the studies we're trying to recruit at the moment is to find out about that. But I could certainly look into what's been published so far.
Yeah, I entered, did that questionnaire.
Oh, good. Yeah. Okay. Well, was it interesting in itself, the questionnaire?
Yes, it was.
Yes, yeah.
Well, one of the questionnaires I completed actually gave you a voucher for £10 with Amazon.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's good if some research studies actually have some funding to do that. Yes. Not all, but
no, that was the only one.
Yes. Yeah, we could certainly look at maybe COVID impact. Yeah. Okay, well, do let me know by email, or if you've got other ideas and suggestions for topics.
Lucy, I'm on the other side of Hertfordshire on West-Herts, and I'm actually a joint dementia research champion.
Oh, hello. I can't see who's speaking.
It's Claire. And we're doing some
hello, Claire.
We're doing some work with Julie Wilson from.
Oh, yes.
So would you mind if Julie, you and I maybe try and connect?
No, that's a great idea.
Join some dots, because I'm just fascinated by what you've got to say. I'm being very quiet, but very selfishly, if we can help spread the magic across this side as well, that would be great.
That's great, because of course the research reading groups, I like doing them in person locally, but if they're online, it could spread to, and I actually did talk with Liz Nash at one point with suggesting doing this, and it's just, so for me, the time to do it, but that would be certainly an ambition to spread it more widely, yes.
Well, it's thanks to Rose from your group that we have hopped on, so really grateful. So that's been the one upside of COVID, that I've got to sit in as a fly on the wall with all your lovely talks that you guys
do. Okay.
Lizzie, where would I get your email address?
I'm just putting it into the chat. So
yes, please do that. So I realise it's not on the slides. I should have put it on the slide.
That's okay. Is that the correct one, Lucy? L.E.
Annett, A-N-N-E-T.
Yeah.
At Hertz, H-E-R-T-S. I'm sure if you Google me, it comes up with my research page at the University of Hertfordshire that would have the address as well.
Yeah, I've put in the chat. It's l.e.annett at herts.ac.uk.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, I'll just leave that up on there for a few seconds before I end the meeting, so people can take that down if they want to. Again, many thanks, Lucy. That was really interesting.
Okay.
And hopefully we'll get you back in not too distant future.
Yeah. Hope to see everyone in person at some point, but maybe not for the next few months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining. Thank you.
you.
Have a good evening.
Okay, thanks then. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.